You accuse the wrong thing. What if now was never the problem? Every chase begins with an accusation. Every grievance begins with an accusation. Every complaint begins with an accusation. The accusation is rarely spoken out loud. It hides underneath words like success, healing, growth, purpose, fulfillment, abundance, improvement, and change. But underneath all of them sits the same verdict. This is not enough. This should be different. This should not be happening. The cat accuses the mouse. The coyote accuses the roadrunner. The seeker accuses the journey. The victim accuses the world. The angry spouse accuses the partner. The disappointed employee accuses the boss. The spiritual seeker accuses the present moment. Everybody thinks they are accusing an object, but the object changes constantly. The dissatisfaction remains remarkably stable. That is the clue. Not the object, the stability. The detective knows better than to stop at the first explanation. He killed because he was jealous. What does that mean? He acted out of rage. What is rage? He did it because of money. What is money to him? Put 10 people in a room and ask them to define jealousy. 10 different stories appear. Ask them to define success. 10 different stories appear. Ask them to define happiness. 10 different stories appear. Ask them to define purpose. 10 different stories appear. The ego hides inside generalities. The detective demands specifics. The ego says, "I want more." The detective asks, "More what?" The ego says, "I want success." The detective asks, "What exactly is success?" The ego says, "I want healing." The detective asks, "What exactly is broken?" The ego says, "I want fulfillment." The detective asks, "What exactly would fulfill you?" The questioning is not punishment. The questioning is exposure. Vague goals can survive forever. Specific claims can be investigated. That is why the chase continues. Most people never define the thing they are chasing. How could they know when they have arrived? This is where the roadrunner enters the case. Wile E. Coyote appears to be chasing a bird. That is the official story. The desert becomes a theater of rockets, traps, tunnels, cliffs, explosions, and ACIM blueprints. Everything appears to revolve around catching the bird. As children, many secretly believed that one day the coyote would finally catch him. Surely one trap would work. Surely one rocket would not fail. Surely one episode would end differently. But the roadrunner never slips. The bird never gets caught. The chase never ends. Why? Because if the coyote catches the bird, the cartoon ends. No more chase. No more coyote. No more identity. The coyote appears to want the bird, but the structure reveals something else. The chase is preserving the chaser. The bird is not the point. The hunt is the point. The same thing happens psychologically. The ego says it wants peace, but peace must remain just out of reach. The ego says it wants fulfillment, but fulfillment must remain just over the horizon. The ego says it wants healing, but there must always be one more wound to examine. The ego says it wants enlightenment, but the seeker must remain a seeker. If there is nothing to chase, there is no chaser. If there is nothing to seek, there is no seeker. If there is no mouse, what is the cat? If there is no roadrunner, what is the coyote? The chase is built upon a hidden accusation. Something is missing. Something is wrong. Something should be different.
That accusation eventually becomes a grievance. The spouse should not have cheated. The child should not have said that. The president should not have won. The body should not have aged. The money should not have disappeared. Reality is placed on trial. Now becomes the defendant. That is the thing below the thing. Every grievance is a courtroom. Every complaint is a prosecution. Every resentment is a trial. Every story is evidence submitted against what is. The mind appoints itself prosecutor. Reality becomes the accused. Now sits at the defense table. The verdict is already prepared. Guilty. Guilty of not being enough. Guilty of not meeting expectations. Guilty of not matching preference. But the detective notices something strange. The entire case against Now is being hosted by the very thing being accused.
The courtroom appears in Now. The prosecutor appears in Now. The witnesses appear in Now. The evidence appears in Now. The grievance appears in Now. The verdict appears in Now. Even the desire to escape now appears in Now. That is the reversal. The prosecution borrows its courtroom from the defendant. The accusation borrows its existence from the thing it attacks. The complaint is evidence for the very thing it believes it is disproving. The mind says, "This proves Now is insufficient." The detective says, "The fact that this experience can appear at all proves Now is sufficient enough to contain even the belief that it is insufficient." That is why every accusation eventually collapses. Not because Now argues back, not because Now defends itself, not because Now fights for its innocence. Now never takes the witness stand. Now never objects. Now never interrupts the proceedings. Now never says, "Stop accusing me." If Now did that, it would become another character in the story, another witness, another opinion, another preference. Instead, Now remains what it is. It hosts the entire trial without participating in it. This is why suffering appears whenever reality is argued with. Not because reality punishes disagreement, not because truth becomes offended. The suffering appears because a gap has been created. Reality says, "This is what is." The mind says, "This should be something else." That gap becomes the chase. That gap becomes time. That gap becomes grievance. That gap becomes suffering. The strange thing is that the argument is always after the fact. The spouse already cheated. The words were already spoken. The money already left. The election already happened. The relationship already ended. The body already changed. Then the mind arrives with amendments, objections, corrections, revisions. The prosecutor attempts to rewrite the crime scene after reality has already entered the record. The argument is always late. Reality is not frozen. Reality is alive. Reality is moving. Reality is unfolding. The mind treats reality like a balance sheet. Now functions more like cash flow. By the time the objection is filed, reality has already moved forward. This is why the detective eventually stops looking at the objects. The objects never solve the mystery. The spouse changes. The grievance remains. The job changes. The grievance remains. The government changes. The grievance remains. The money changes. The grievance remains. The target changes. The dissatisfaction remains remarkably stable. That stability becomes evidence. The detective follows the evidence backward. Not to the spouse, not to the money, not to the election, not to the roadrunner, not to the mouse, but to the original accusation. Something is missing. Something is wrong. Now is not enough. That is the suspect behind every chase. That is the prosecutor behind every grievance. That is the assumption behind every complaint. And once that assumption is questioned, the whole case begins to fall apart. If now is not enough, what exactly would be enough? Be specific. Not better. Better how? Not success. Success according to whom? Not healing. What exactly is healed? Not abundance. How much is enough? Not purpose. Who assigned it? Every answer appears inside now. Every solution appears inside now. Every dream of completion appears inside now. Every memory appears inside now. Every plan appears inside now. Every escape route appears inside now. There is nowhere else for them to appear. That is why the accusation cannot stand. The defendant was never guilty. Now was never the problem. Reality was never the problem. Truth was never the problem. Love was never the problem. God did not forget an ingredient. Life did not require an edit. The missing thing was not missing. The mind merely believed it was. Then it went looking for witnesses. A spouse, a body, a bank account, a diagnosis, a politician, a childhood memory, a roadrunner, a mouse. The witnesses kept changing. The accusation remained the same. The object changed constantly. The dissatisfaction remained remarkably stable. That is how the detective solved the case. The accused was innocent. The prosecutor was mistaken. The evidence never supported the charge. The entire case against Now was being hosted by the very thing being accused. And all along, Now never needed a defense, because Now was never the problem.